brothers and sisters within the Kingdom of England and Empire of Albion. As I, Archbishop Belmont from the illustrious noble house of Belmont, and I'd like to give honors to our King, Clifford Jefferson from the Royal House of Plantagenet, our Queen, Lisa Jordan from the House of Godwinson, C.A. Murphy, Esquire Burgess, Countess Cersei, Countess Walker, as well as the other brothers and sisters within the church, trustees, members, etc. And I'm coming to you with this quick little small lesson. The King have already did this, so for those of you who are hearing me, please go and check the Third Temple English Church of England YouTube channel, because you're going to need to know these lessons if you see yourself within me and want to find your way back to the English church, which is the visible church, the de jure church for the English heirs and successors who have been scattered amongst the four corners of the world by the so-called British, as well as the other so-called monarchs and corporations who have an interest to keep us in servitude and in darkness, i.e. mental bondage. All right. And this case is a very good case, so for those of you who actually are reading this, let's go to the beginning of it. And we're not going to go through too much. I just want you to see what case this is. And this calls Enra Ahmed Hassan, U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan. So this is the United States District Court case. And this is a case talking about naturalization and those who qualify as so-called free white person or white persons based off of the status or the group that they say that they belong to. All right. And now in 1791, when the Naturalization Act was created, the Naturalization Act told you who was considered white persons. And we're going to go ahead and read a little quick smidge of this case, and then I'm going to go straight to the nitty gritty because time is of the essence. And I know based off of how people nowadays are, their attention span is very short. So let's get to it. And this case was judged by District Court Judge Tuttle. All right, it says Ahmed Hassan of Detroit, Michigan, in propria persona, and C.R. Berg, naturalization examiner of Detroit, Michigan, for the government. It says petitioner is an Arab being a native of Yemen, located in the southwestern part of the Arabian Peninsula. Petitioner was before the court and his skin was undisputedly dark brown in color. The issue here presented is whether petitioner is a white person within the meaning of the provisions of the Nationality Code, enumerating the classes of people who are eligible for citizenship in the United States. All right, it says affidavits filed by petitioner and one other person state that the extremely dark complexion of petitioner's skin is typical of a majority of the Arabians from the region from which he comes, which fact is attributed to the intense heat and the blazing sun of that area. Petitioner claims that as has been established by ethnologists, the Arabs are remote descendants and therefore are members of the Caucasian or white race, and that he is therefore eligible for citizenship. Pause. So we got three things here. One, that the petitioner is dark brown. Two, the petitioner wants to qualify as a white person. And three, based off of the research that's been established by ethnologists, Arabs are descendants of Caucasians. Now, that would mean that the Caucasians had to also be dark skinned based off of what this ethnologist is saying, and the fact that this brother coming from Yemen is dark skinned or dark brown, and we can say technically copper colored. Okay, so based off of that understanding, we know that scientifically wise, that historically Caucasians were all dark skinned people. All right, so that's a fact. Let's continue. All right, it says the decision of the Supreme Court in the United States of Bhagat Singh and Ozawa, United States, interpreting the statute in question controlled the result here. It says in those cases, the court held that the statute imported a racial rather than an individual test. The actual color of the skin of the particular individual not being decisive, that the phrase white person was generally synonymous with that of a member of the Caucasian race, as popularly understood, and that scientific or ethnological classifications of races were not significant in the application of the act. Pause. So the 1791 Naturalization Act had nothing to do with so-called your complexion, technically. It had nothing to do with your ethnicity, you tying yourself back to the group, but it was determined based off of what was popularly accepted at the time of the creation of the 1790 Naturalization Act. And at the time, so-called Caucasians were seen as recessive or pale-skinned people, not dark-skinned, copper-colored, dark brown folks, as we see here with the brother Ahmed from Yemen. All right. It says, let me continue. It accordingly held that the petitioner therein, a high caste Hindu who claimed to be of Caucasian race from a scientific classification based upon remote ancestry was not eligible for citizenship. You hear this? All right. So it says the court indicated serious doubt as to whether any peoples of Asiatic stock could be considered white persons within the meaning of the statute, but left open for future determination to question whether some Asiatics might be so closely related to Europeans as to be eligible for citizenship. Let's continue. It appears that the status of Arabian under the act has not been definitely settled by the courts. The decision of this court in the United States versus Ali is not precisely in point because the defendant Ali in that case at the time he was admitted to citizenship claimed to be a high caste Hindu, but later in the proceedings to cancel his citizenship claimed that although he was a native of India, he was an Arabian of Arabian blood from remote ancestry. Okay? Let's continue. Consideration of the question leads for the conclusion that petitioner is not eligible for citizenship in the United States. The court is of the opinion that when one seeking citizenship is in fact clearly not white of skin, a strong burden of proof devolves upon him to establish that he is a white person within the meaning of the act. It would appear that the petitioner's skin is somewhat darker complexion than that of many Arabs. However, this court does not rest its decision on that ground, but rather upon the ground that Arabs as a class are not white and therefore not eligible as citizenship. Pause. So they're telling you that Arabs at the time of the Creation and Naturalization Act was not considered white. So therefore, this brother Ahmed, Hassan cannot classify himself as white person because Arabs themselves were not white persons underneath the 1790 Naturalization Act. Let's continue. It says, in view of the evident intent of Congress interpreted by the Supreme Court and the thing supra, the court should be presented with a convincing case before it holds a person of Asiatic stock to be white. Apart from the dark skin of the Arabs, it is well known that they are part of the Mohammedan world and that a wide gulf separates their culture from that of the predominantly Christian peoples of Europe. It cannot be expected that as a class they would readily intermarry with our population and be assimilated into our civilization. The amount of immigration of these peoples to the United States is in itself evidence of that fact. Arabia, moreover, is not immediately contiguous to Europe or even to the Mediterranean. It is true that most of the Arabian Peninsula, including Yemen, is outside the zone from which Asiatic immigration to this country is excluded. Blah, 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 blah. Let's get to the good point. It says, to summarize the approach which must be followed in deciding whether a particular person applying for citizenship is a white person within the meaning of the statute as interpreted by the Supreme Court, it is necessary to determine first the particular group or racial subdivision to which the individual belongs. So they're telling you it's determined by the group that you say you belong, not you as an individual and not your so-called skin tone. It says, in practical effect, proof of this fact is a matter of genealogy. Pause. And that's the nail in the coffin, is your genealogy is going to prove the group that you come from. It ain't your belief system. It ain't based off of you to reading some so-called historian books. It ain't because you met up with your friend who you known for 20 years and said, I think this is who we are. Nah, it's based off of genealogy. So you're going to go ahead and do some research. Utilize that surname, start going through some court documents, start going through those census records, start asking some questions, but you need to have prima facie evidence via your so-called genealogy to prove who you are, going back to a specific time and a specific group that you said you come from. All right. It says the individual who presents an aberration, that means a difference. An individual who presents an aberration or a difference from the color of skin of the group of which he is a member, such as a light-skinned Chinese or Japanese, and in our case here, dark-skinned Anglo-Saxons, does not thereby acquire a different status under the act from other members of his group. Pause. So those so-called recessive or light-skinned or pale-skinned people who claim to be Anglo-Saxons and us being dark-skinned Anglo-Saxons, we're not underneath a different so-called group status-wise as them. Therefore, if they're seen as so-called white persons, we're seen as white person. Please pay attention, because this is the truth that many of you brothers and sisters who claim to be black have no information or no true understanding of what it truly is when you keep calling yourself so-called black. White and black is nothing more than caste systems. You call yourself black, that doesn't mean your so-called skin tone is so-called that. You're dark complexion. But when you call yourself black in law, it doesn't mean you don't know who you are. You're non-corpus mentis, unsound mind, need a guardian, and you consider a so-called criminal based off of the Black Act that was passed by Parliament. All right. So once again, it says an individual presents an aberration from the color of skin of the group of which he is a member, such as light-skinned Chinese or Japanese or dark-skinned Anglo-Saxon, does not thereby acquire a different status under the act from other members of his group. Of course, when an individual applying for citizenship has a skin of a different color than is usual for the members of the group for which he claims to come, a strong burden of proof then rests upon him to show by the usual methods of proving genealogy that he is in fact a member of that group. Okay, So, and like it's in the last part, after the individual has been traced into his group, the second question which the court must answer is whether the members of the group as a whole are white persons as Congress understood the term in 1790 when it first enacted the statute. And in this case, yes, Anglo-Saxons were considered white persons because the law that so-called America stands off of, it comes from the English law, aka Anglo-Saxon law. And yes, us dark-skinned Anglo-Saxon Berbers, we are still here. We have the ancestry to prove it. And our English king, King Clifford Jefferson from the Royal House of Plantagenet, is back to resurrect what? The body politic for the English heirs and successors to be able to be alive and be counted amongst the world and people. So that way we can no longer be seen as so-called black, subservient, non-descendable, etc. Any other so-called word that does not place us in a category of nobility and royalty. We can now no longer claim to be inferior words or inferiority status or have an inferiority complex. You are the supreme people on the land. So with that being said, you must do the research. Trace those genealogy, trace your genealogy, trace your genealogy. You must trace your genealogy back to the group you claim to be from. All right. So with that being said, we love you. Please stay tuned to the future lessons as well. For those of you who are getting ready for the great eclipse, remember X marks the spot. X represents Kiro. And for those of you who are found yourself as being English heirs and successors, our English king has returned for those people who are ready to pledge their allegiance back to the king, back to our kingdom, back to our visible church, because Christ has returned. Peace.